Endurance isn't enough to win even in endurance sports. The Russians knew this, and hopefully you will too after watching this episode. So, how do I know this? Well, I've been reading the science and practice of strength training by these renowned Russian authors as a part of my 50 Days to Rebuild challenge, where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 30. Okay, so let's start with endurance training and how we do it. So if we were doing strength training, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the amount of muscular units we can activate, which by the way that muscular activation works, gets fast twitch involved much faster. So that quick activation muscle. Whereas we're trying to achieve the opposite with endurance training. And as a result, we essentially flip how you train. So we lower the load and we increase the reps. If we're really pushing it and we're wanting to do like a high intensity endurance with weights, we do about 60 to 80% of a 1 rep maximum with very short rest intervals. Alternatively, again, if you're wanting to use weights for this, we're doing like a low intensity, we do about 40% of a 1 rep maximum. Or alternatively, like essentially anything that you could do like more than 20 reps with. Okay, but what's up with this limitation to endurance? So off the bat, the authors covered that local muscle endurance does not correlate with performance. So it's not about increasing muscular endurance, it's more about an overarching endurance. So I guess cardio. And that makes things a bit confusing because obviously you're going to need to have like adequate strength and endurance in individual muscles to be able to do particular activities. Right, like if you're doing rowing, obviously you need a lot of endurance, but if you don't have the strength to pull really hard, that's going to be a problem. The additional issue on top of that is that muscular endurance and strength are not correlated. At best, with a lightweight, they're negatively correlated. So we have this real issue that we kind of need both, but they're not correlated, so how do we get there? Well, the authors put forward what I would argue is a pretty flexible approach to doing this. So if we run with the same rowing example, they compared what you need for your sport. So say rowing is 1,000 newtons of force, just a scientific measurement of force, right? And then you compare it to your 1 rep max of a similar action on land, right? So like rowing, maybe it's like a barbell row. Let's say you could do 2,500 newtons of force with that 1 rep max. Alright, so now we just need to compare those numbers. So if that sport-specific activity, that rowing, that 1,000 newtons, is greater than 80% of what you can do on land, you need to train strength. I think that makes sense. Essentially it's saying you have a deficit in strength, work on that. Alternatively, on the flip side, they said that if your sporting activity is less than 20% of your max lift, train endurance. And if you're somewhere in the middle, just train both. Okay, so endurance wasn't just enough, we needed strength to do the activity. But moreover, I think something that's probably more important is some of the other benefits of like explosive training and strength training. So strength training in particular, they've outlined, is just important for connective tissue growth. We all know that bodybuilders are getting stronger, they're getting bigger, it looks better, but that's protective, right? So if you're very weak, you're more likely to get injured. You're not going to have as much tissue laying down to protect a joint. This is exactly the argument they're making. You need more connective tissue to make sure you're safe. And in a similar vein, they said that if you want to protect from like traumas, so anything that's sort of explosive, like something hitting somebody or whatever that might look like, you want to train reversible muscle action, which is essentially just plyometrics. You want to do really explosive stuff. Now, how do you do this? Basically, they said that you want to try and do these, again, explosive movements, holding a weight and releasing it. The rationale for this was that if you hold onto the weight doing something aggressive, the antagonists, so the muscles that try and prevent movement that's occurring so that you don't do something crazy, they're going to fire and they're going to sort of limit and inhibit that action. Whereas what we want to do is get past that. We want to increase the rate of force production. And I think it's really important here that it's essentially saying we need to train endurance, power, and strength. So they covered an example where they said if you exclusively train power, for example, you'll see a plateau. And more than that, you'll actually see a decrease in strength. And then also vice versa. So if you just train strength, it'll plateau and you'll decrease your power. So you basically can't skip out on any of these factors. So if we come back to that original example, why would an endurance athlete need more than just endurance to win? It would be to protect themselves, their connective tissue. It would be so that they are less susceptible to trauma, and so that they actually have the strength to do whatever activity that they're doing. Now, the last thing that I learned today sort of ties into more of an injury side of things that I thought was very intriguing. So the authors were saying that if you have pain somewhere, so let's say left side lower back, and that you find that you generally tend to sort of lean towards it to ease the pain. In that case, they're arguing that, let's say you're compressing a nerve, that the rootlet of that nerve is below some protrusion. But if you instead lean away from it, the rootlet is probably above it. Hopefully this is actually very applicable to pain I have. I think I might have something going on like that with potential like sciatica and stuff. That's essentially it for the learning side of things, tying into what I did on the exercise front. So yesterday I discussed that when doing the hinge exercise, I noticed that I'm collapsing into the side of my feet. I don't have a stable base. So I tried to work on this at the foot level by doing these little rollovers onto my medial foot, so like the inner edge. This felt decent at the time, but with some knee pain. And I noticed later on when I got home from work that I had some hamstring pain as well. So that was probably like the biggest thing I did different. So not great. I don't know where that lands me. I guess I'm going to have to try and do something else, or maybe change to cueing, because I need something to stabilize. The bird dog, again, I'm actually managing to stay somewhat more neutral, but really feel like I'm sacrificing all of the wonderful activation sensation that I get doing a bird dog. You know, most of the reason why I do it. It does really relieve pain when I get that sensation. But I guess like it was just horrific seeing how hyperextended I was before, so I need to try something. So hopefully we start to get a bit of an increase in activation from here. Now, of course, I did the rest of the McGill Big Three. Honestly, it went really well. Like the side plank, the curl up, no issues. And I've also been continuing to do some of the joint movements from Pavel Sassoline. I feel like generally I feel better afterwards. So yeah, I guess that's a positive. And that about wraps it up for day 30. I'm very excited to be at the Big 3-0. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.